All right, good morning, everyone. So this morning, I'm going to tell you the story of a plucky young aspiring developer who learned that it really wasn't about the tooling that she had everything she needed to code already at the time. So our story begins way back in April of 2017 with an aspiring developer going through tutorials, going through projects, building things, just doing everything she could to try to get eventually a super awesome coding job that she knew would eventually be hers. All was going well, super excited, until disaster struck. No, it wasn't quite actually that bad, but that's how it felt. I was coding on a Surface Pro 3, which, as it turned out, had a pretty glaring issue with the battery that made it inoperable after about 2 years. Of course, nothing worked. Could not even turn the thing on. And the downside was, it was also basically irreparable. Even Microsoft wouldn't even touch it. If you had it under warranty, they would literally just send it back, send a new one back to you. So this was iFixit. If anybody has tried that before, even they viewed it as basically one of the hardest things they could try to fix. So I was stuck. The only machine that I had for coding was now irreparably broken. I did not have a warranty to get that replaced. So I did what probably any millennial coder would do. I asked the internet. I went on Twitter and I was like, hey, what kind of computers do you know of that are good workhorses and I could get really cheap? Because I didn't have a job yet and I wasn't about to go spending $1,000 on a new machine. So shortly after, I started getting a ton of feedback from people, was actually able to figure out something on Newegg, a refurb. So I figured, okay, I have this new machine, I've ordered it, it's gonna come in the mail in just a few days. You know, I will be patient and, you know, watch some tutorials, read some blogs, you know, just, I won't code for a few days, that's all, right? Just wait, it's too awkward. So I waited, and I waited, and I waited, and probably like any red-blooded American developer wannabe, I couldn't take just sitting there reading things, I wanted to be building things. So who wouldn't? So I realized I needed to try to do something with what I had, which was just an iPhone. And for those of you with Android, you may be rolling your eyes at some of the next few pieces. Just bear with us, because iPhone was a little late to the party. Okay. So I did some digging, and I realized that I needed basically 3 things to get my coding done and be productive with my iPhone. I needed a good text editor, preferably something that would work without a Bluetooth keyboard. I needed to be able to set up a server. We're on the cloud now. We don't need a physical server. And be able to get into that server with SSH so that I could actually put some code up there. And then finally, of course, I needed a way to access in my browser what I was coding and what I was putting up there so that I could continue to develop and troubleshoot my work. So let's start with the losers. First, I tried Code Anywhere, if anyone's heard of that one. At the time, it was actually, the iOS app was completely non-functional. People actually thought it had been left for dead. It has come back up and running, but it's still not really easy to use on mobile, which to me kind of seemed like the point of being able to code anywhere. Should be able to do it from anything. Also tried the Cloud9 IDE. It's a IDE that now is owned by Amazon AWS. So while at the time they did not have support for mobile browsers and it was nowhere on their roadmap, that may potentially change now that they have bigger backing and better funding. And of course, CodePen, for any front-end developers out there, you may be familiar with it, a great HTML, CSS, JavaScript editor in the browser. It actually wasn't terrible. I feel bad calling it a loser. But the layout and the on-screen keyboard, since you were using the browser defaults, really could be more optimized for mobile. So it could work, it just didn't work as well as I wanted it to. So from there, I found my manna from heaven, the buffer editor. It's not the only choice, but it offered an extended keyboard, the built-in terminal that I needed, full screen editing, which on a tiny screen you really, really need. syntax highlighting and autocomplete for over 40 languages. And if you didn't appreciate autocomplete on your desktop, you definitely would appreciate it on your mobile when you're typing everything with one hand. You could also connect, of course, via SSH, FTP, GitHub, Dropbox, and iCloud, which made it easy to transfer files back and forth from the servers that I needed so that I could actually get my work done and have it where I could make things I'm showing people. It also has some additional functionality I didn't take advantage of, so folks that like Vim, you can use it. It also has Bluetooth keyboard support as well. So I had my text editor. Next, I needed to get a server set up and SSH access into it so I could put some stuff up there. I found the easiest option in general was DigitalOcean. You could spin up a server, get your SSH access in, and have everything going within a minute and a half. You could still do the same thing with AWS, but of course, their console is much more cluttered and you have to go through more steps. And do you really want to do this on your phone? So, trade-offs. It is more do-it-yourself, so just bear that in mind if you do choose to develop with DigitalOcean. But the clean and simple interface just really won me over. And of course, with buffer editors, SSH access into my server was easy. I just plugged in the details that DigitalOcean gave me about my server, my droplet, and I was on my way. Nowadays, you'll actually find with iOS 12, SSH is supported without any additional applications. It may or may not be as easy to do, but it's there. So, of course, I had my text editor, I had my server. Now, the main issue that I had from there was browser access. For anybody who's done local development, one thing that you love is you can develop things on your machine. No one can see it but you, right? Because your development server is binding to your local IP address. No one else can see this. Problem is, if you're setting up on a cloud server, you don't have access to that screen, that GUI. So you have to figure out some way to get on your browser what's on that machine. Otherwise, it's inaccessible outside of it. So what it ended up coming down to, and I learned a lot about servers and requests, was when starting a server, it's going to send what's called a bind request to say that it's ready to receive requests associated with that IP address, with that location. So normally, if you're doing a development server, it's going to bind to your local IP address, the one that's only available on your computer. Makes sense. In this case, what I wanted to do was literally tell it to bind to my public IP address, the one that I could use to access that server from outside of it. That was pretty easy to do. DigitalOcean obviously provides you your public IP address for your droplets. So all I needed to do, in this case, I was working with Ruby on Rails, was just set it a binding flag telling it what IP address to bind to. And from there, instead of having my browser go to localhost :3000, I could go to my public IP address for my server :3000 and access my development application. The nice thing also with Buffer Editor was that it conveniently kept the server running for you as you're going back out of the terminal so that you could open it again, continue to develop in the editor. There are some additional steps you can take to stop the server, but that was convenient for me. So, of course, after that, it was on like Donkey Kong. I was just typing away on my little phone and getting actually back to productive. I was making commits left and right. I actually got started on a new Ruby on Rails application. It was the first time I had ever built a Ruby on Rails application, and I was starting it from scratch. And during the time, I actually was able to make 17 commits, not counting pull requests that I made and merged during that time. It was the first, again, Ruby on Rails project I did, first dynamic web application that I had worked on, really first time diving into back-end coding. And I did it on mobile. During this time, I also started using Pivotal Tracker for kind of my project management, tracking like what steps I needed to take, which also had a very convenient mobile GUI to work with. So it made it really easy to do this without having access to my machine. So of course, I got right back to that productivity very quickly after losing my computer. But as anybody could imagine, I was super, super stoked when I found out that my new laptop was going to be arriving. Well, new refurb, was from 2012, so pretty old. Um, but of course, ended up back with a new laptop, so I was able to get back to coding on something where I could have, multiple windows open, where I could be just a little bit more productive than I could otherwise on my phone. But when Wi-Fi is out, computer breaks, go on a road trip, and I'm on a train or a bus or something else, I had now a tool that I could use where I could still take my iPhone and actually get some good work done. Now, the tools that I use don't have to be the tools that you use to do the same thing. If you're on iOS, there is also what's called Working Copy, which is a convenient tool for managing your version control, like your Git. And you could actually use that in combination with the native SSH that's built into iOS now. So that could be your combination. Terminus also gives you a really nice GUI for your terminal access on iOS as well. And again, you can use that native SSH. For folks on Android, of course, you really don't have to look that far. There's a lot more things that are already exposed to you by default. Just look for a convenient editor of your choice, usually based on what language you're developing in. There are tons of them in the Android store. The one thing I will say as a caveat with iOS is none of the options are going to give you everything you're going to need for free. So do expect to spend anywhere from $5 to $15, $20 total to get access to the tools that you're going to need to get really productive. But for me, impatient as I was, it was worth what I paid was $5 at the time for Buffer Editor. It was worth that to get back to being productive. So of course, I will open things up for some questions. But of course, my name is Chazona Baum. I am a principal technologist over at Max Potential over in the Neon. Any additional questions we don't get answered here, if you just want to say hi, you can always DM me at Chazona Codes on Twitter. And if you'd like to review kind of a written overview I had at the time, that's available on the Practical Dev as well.